Welcome everybody. Hopefully that music got you a little bit into the mood of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be talking about identifying Agile double agents, and this was somewhat inspired by some history reading I was doing, and got to thinking about some of the who I consider one of the probably the best double agent ever existed, and how he was able to mislead the Nazis. And it got me thinking, what types of things on an Agile team would a nefarious agent be able to mislead people? So we're going to talk about counter-espionage for Agile teams. No hat. Okay. So in 1940, Germany started sending spies to England. And they were poorly trained, unmotivated, easy to spot. And in addition to when the Allies cracked the Enigma machine, it made it... the Nazis weren't getting much value out of the spies that they were sending. So England was thinking, and they said, you know what, if we could find a way to turn the spies, then maybe Germany wouldn't keep sending more. So that was kind of their thought process, which seemed plausible. And what ended up happening is they tried taking some of the spies that were being sent from Germany and turning them. That didn't actually work so well. They kept getting into situation. There was one situation where one of the spies that had been sent from the Nazis, they thought they had turned him, but then he tried to strangle his handler from the UK and took off with a motorcycle, carrying a canoe, with the idea he was going to paddle to Norway or something like that. Anyway, he kind of gave up when he fell down over in front of a policeman. Anyway, they recaptured him and stuff. So the idea of turning the agents wasn't working very well. It did in a few cases. So that came to that brought England to the point that they were looking for the double cross system of actually taking agents and getting them recruited into Germany and but being double agents for the UK. So probably the most successful is Juan Pujol. I think I'm pronouncing his name right. Garcia. So he goes to Britain. He was from Spain. Was very, very much against fanaticism based on some of his early history with stuff. He goes to Spain because he's really trying to stop the Nazis. He sees what's happening and wants to do his part against the Nazis. Both he and his wife. So he goes to the UK and says, "I want to spy for Britain," and they say, "Thanks, but no thanks." Okay, so question here for you is, if you were Pujol and that's what you were doing, what would you do next? He had previously been at the Royal Poultry School. What would you do next if you were not able to actually spy for Britain? Let's see what you think. And let me, it should be showing up. Here's the Slido link again for anybody that wants it. Okay, so what Pujol actually did here is the only thing he didn't do was actually go back to the Royal Poultry School in Spain. He developed a persona as being fanatically pro-Nazi in order to be somebody that they would trust. He created a fake Spanish diplomatic passport, and then went to the WWII, I may be saying it wrong, the agent in Madrid, and said, "Okay, can I be a spy for Nazi Germany?" Nazi, "Why not? Welcome to WWII. Your code name is Elric. Federico will give you a crash course on spying, and here's your invisible ink and £600 for expenses. Please recruit some more spies." So they were very, very accepting of having. They were a little suspicious at first, but accepted him as a spy. Taught him how to write in secret messages in invisible ink, gave him some money, and told him to go promote some more spies. So Danka, I may be saying that wrong too. Anyway, he was happy. So then he turns around and he goes back to Britain and says, "The Nazis hired me as a spy. Are you sure I can't work for you? If you're good enough for the Nazis, then you're good enough for Britain." Anyway, that's kind of what happened here. So Pujol ended up in a situation where he had gone to Germany, started as a spy there, and then pretending to be a spy there, and went back to Britain. And then they hired him. Okay, so imagine you're Britain and you just hired Pujol. What should you do? So you could have him send misinformation. You could have him send correct information. give him a cool name like Garbo, or have him send insults to the Nazis. See what everybody thinks. And this is going somewhere related to Agile. You didn't tune into the wrong Agile Lunch and Learn. Okay, so most of us say this would be a great time to have him start sending misinformation to the Nazis. I see we've at least got a few people that are like, have him just really insult the Nazis good. What they actually just started doing is have him send correct information. And the reason is if they wanted to build trust, having him just start sending misinformation wouldn't let them, wouldn't develop the trust that they needed for the misinformation that we'll be talking about kind of at the end of things. So they actually had him send correct information, but in ways that wasn't actually actionable. They also gave him a cool name called Garbo. As a matter of fact, I think that's his first handle or his main contribution was to give him the codename Garbo, who I think was the last name of a famous actress at the time. And they're like, this guy's so good, he ought to be named after the greatest actress or greatest person doing acting around. Anyway, that was the thought behind it. Anyway, they had him start sending correct information and develop quite a system of getting information to Germany, to the Nazis, in ways that made it look like he was being very, very helpful, but in ways that wasn't helpful in order to build up a situation where they could provide misinformation later. And we'll look about that a little bit. Okay, so cool story, but what does this have to do with Agile? So as I was actually reading through this the other day, I was like, so this is really interesting, and the amount of trust that Garbo, Peugeot, whatever we want to call him, Alaric, he's got all these names, was able to build with the Nazis made me wonder if there was somebody on an Agile team that maybe was trying to mislead with information, what would that, or mislead the team, what would that look like? What types of things might they do? And as I say this out loud, I realize it probably sounds like I just come up with really crazy scenarios in my mind. But if there was somebody that wasn't really aligned with what the team was trying to deliver, what types of things would they do that would look really, really good, but would mislead the team? Which is exactly what Garbo was doing with the Nazis. So if you had a double agent trying to undermine your Agile team, would you be able to tell? So no, 57% say no here. Yes, and I've already identified them. Or just yes, you think you'd be able to tell. Because remember, and I'm sure England was thinking about this, because the stuff that they were doing to mislead the Nazis, they were probably also trying to be very careful they weren't being misled in the same way by double agent work headed, or a double agent that was actually serving the Nazis. Okay, so how could we identify a double agent on our team? How could we identify someone whose goals don't align with the goal of the Agile team? And maybe another way to phrase this, how could we identify goals that don't align with the goal of the Agile team, right? You may even have, we're talking about nefarious agent because that makes it interesting and everything, but we might have people just with different goals that are going to try to head the team in not so good of a direction, even if they're not doing it for nefarious purposes. So how can we identify goals that don't align with the goal of the Agile team? So that brings up an important point. How clearly can your Agile team identify its goals? So on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is not clearly at all, to 5 very, very clearly, how clearly can your team identify its goals? We'll see where we end up here. Okay, so we kind of got the gamut all over here, but sounds like most of us, there are fewer of us saying that just completely clearly identifying its goals, and more kind of toward the middle. Let me post this link here one more time. So yes, it definitely does, probably depends on the goals. But I want to suggest that as an Agile team, we have some goals that are probably very clear. So if we ask, does our Agile team know what its goals are? Well, here's one of the goals that should be true for every Agile team, right? Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Now, we have the details of the goal of what is considered to be valuable software, but this should be a goal of any Agile team. It should be a primary goal of any Agile team. If this isn't a primary goal of any Agile team, then maybe we've got a goal out there that's going to be leading us in the wrong direction. Working software is the primary measure of progress. This is another goal that every Agile team should have. This should be driving the way the team behaves. Deliver working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference toward the shorter time scale. If you have an Agile team that is not trying to do this, they've got a different goal. They're headed in a different direction. Welcome changing requirements, even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. Once again, a goal that if you're on an Agile team, this should be a primary goal for that team. If they've got a goal that conflicts with this, then you may have some possibly well-meaning, but agents on your team that are trying to steer you in the wrong direction. So one of the things that can happen on Agile teams is when you've got a team, when you've got somebody that's got a different definition of success. Okay, if we have different definitions of success, whether it's nefarious or not, we're not going to be headed in the right direction. So let's look how that played out a little bit with Pujol. So Pujol defines, or Garbo, we'll call him Garbo because that's a cool name. I define success as defeating the Nazis. And Nazis are like, we define success as ruling the world. So Garbo is saying, but I can make it look like I'm helping the Nazis. And Nazis are saying, Pujol is the greatest thing since sliced Wiener Schnitzel. So these are different goals, right? The Nazis' goal of ruling the world. Pujol has a goal of trying to undermine what they're trying to do, but he's doing it in a way that actually makes it look like he's supporting their goal. So what would that look like on a team? If somebody's trying to undermine the goals on your team, what might that look like? Well, here's some examples of contrary definitions of success. You have an Agile project, and that's saying we will be successful by delivering working software to the customer, right? That's a key piece of Agile definition of success. It should be a key goal for an Agile team. Nefarious double agent, though, might have a goal of saying, I want to write my own framework, and I think I can slip it in as part of this project. So this is a very common thing, and it's easy to do. As an engineer, as a developer, there's ideas I have in my mind that it's very easy for me to look for a project where I could implement those things, whether it's really in conflict with the idea of successfully delivering working software to the customer. So that's an example of contrary definition of success. Another one, Agile project says we will be successful by delighting the customer. A nefarious double agent might be saying, I want to use blockchain technology, so I'm going to find a way to use it on this project, whether the customer needs it or not. So those are examples of things that you might experience. You may have seen stuff like this, where there are different definitions of success. And using the term nefarious agent here, there may be people doing this for very well-meaning purposes, right? I can't remember what the movie was where there was an agent that did not know he was a double agent, and like there was a code word that triggered him. That might be what your double agent is like, right? They may be doing things thinking they're actually trying to help the team, but maybe don't have the Agile experience, or haven't been in situations where they've seen Agile be successful, and they may be inadvertently or intentionally undermining it. So ways to mitigate contrary definitions of success. Well, one, always reiterate the Agile principles. If you've got a team that is continually asking themselves, okay, we're about to make this decision, how would the Agile principles help decide how we make this decision here? That's a team that's going to steer toward consistent goals, right? And similar definitions of success. I was using an example with a team here a while back, and we were talking about how if we all got into a van and half of us thought we were headed to LA and the other half thought we were headed to Chicago, and one person's driving and trying to head to Chicago and somebody else keeps yanking the wheel over to try to turn it to go to LA, the problem isn't that there's conflict within the team, right? The problem is we've got different ideas about where we're trying to go. And until we resolve that and have the same definition of what we're trying to accomplish, the conflict will be there. And it's not a bad thing for it to be there. It should be there because we're trying to accomplish completely different things. So reiterating the Agile principles can help make sure that we're all trying to head the same direction. Keep team aligned on the story they are delivering next. Avoid work that isn't immediately usable in delivering a story. So this is something I see a lot where teams are trying to work so far ahead because there's stuff that they're seeing what they need to do in the future, that they lose sight of how do we deliver something functional to the user in the near term. Don't try to address risk outside of the context of a user story. So this is something that, and it's very easy to do, but get in a position where like, hey, we're going to need to integrate with this technology down the road, so we're going to go build a proof of concept and try to do this to integrate with that technology so we'll have the experience by the time we get there. Instead, what you should do is pull the stories forward if you need to address the risk sooner. If you want to address the risk of integrating with a piece of technology, instead of trying to get so far ahead with it, pull a story, the smallest thing you can possible, to address that risk now. And like I said, these are all the ways of trying to make sure that you've got similar definitions of success. Because if you end up with the idea of dealing with the risk, if you end up with a situation where you've got people headed in a very different direction by trying to deal with the risk early, you're now violating a lot of the Agile principles that are saying you need to work on delivering things iteratively to the customer. We can still address the risk, we just need to do it within the context of iteratively delivering for the customer. Okay, back to our story, back to Pujo. So Pujo goes back to the Nazis, and I think he actually did this before or started doing this even before he got back in contact with Britain. And I'm simplifying things here. I believe he actually contacted somebody in the US who got with Britain and said, hey, you really need to take this guy seriously. Anyway, he goes back to the Nazis and say, hey, I've recruited 27 spies. Here are their reports and all their expenses. So by the time he was done, he had built out this entire organization. None of these people, except for Garbo, existed, right? There's all these people, all these different agents, and they've got sub-agents underneath them, and it worked out great because whenever if he did report misinformation to the Nazis, and they're like, that was wrong, well, he could blame it on one of these agents and say, well, they gave me the wrong information on that. So 27 people that he had put together that was part of his spying organization, and it was just him, and eventually eventually the Britons too, just creating massive amounts of reports. Of things that were going on. He was going to the library and looking up things from the guidebook, because at first he was still, I think he was still in Spain before he made contact with the Britons, and they brought him on. But he was generating all this information. Matter of fact, one of the reasons that the Britons saw that he was valuable is in one of his reports, he had described a fictitious convoy to the Nazis. And the Britons saw the message go through, and then saw the Nazis spending huge amounts of effort to try to locate this convoy that he had just made up. Anyway, build out this huge organization, none of which actually existed. Okay? So I've recruited 27 spies. Here's their expense reports. He's like, great, there's no need for us to recruit anyone else. Pujo's organization was so big in the Nazis' mind, and he was delivering so much information that there's no need for us to get other spies and send them to Britain. We've got 27 agents there on the ground doing stuff for us. So this brings us to something that, in looking through this and thinking about how he was able to deceive the Nazis, I think there's a very strong tendency to equate team size inspiring false confidence. And it did it for the Nazis, and it can do it for your team too, right? You can get into a situation where you start equating the size of your team with your chances of success, and those aren't at all related. So here's an example. So we've got Garbo talking here. I'm concerned that it takes our team a long time to deliver working code. And somebody says, me too, but don't worry, I'll take care of it. How? Well, I'm going to hire 27 more developers, because obviously having more people will increase our chances will fix the problem of being able to deliver working code more rapidly. This is very rarely actually the case, but this feels so good, right? It feels like I'm doing something because I hired more people. That's how it felt to the Nazis, but that same thing that made them susceptible to the idea of there's 27 people and had a lot of confidence in it because of so many people being there can mislead your team as well. If you have a double agent on your team, they might be suggesting stuff like this of let's hire 27 more people in order to have more developers so we feel safer without actually addressing the real issues. Okay, if you've been on a small team that grew by 3 times or more to go faster, what happened? Did you deliver ahead of schedule, deliver on schedule, deliver late, project was canceled, or maybe you're in the middle of this and still to be determined? And Astrid, that's a good point. The bigger your team you lead, the more important you are, allegedly. I was on a project one time that was trying to use a small team, like 5 to 7 developers. And it was amazing how much effort there was from management to try to scale the team up to 50 developers. Because for the managers, and this was years and years ago, like more than a decade ago now, I guess. But because of the way things were structured, the managers got more value for themselves and were seen as more important if there was a bigger team. So there was lots of push toward having a bigger team, whether they needed it or not. In that case, I would say they were acting as a double agent, right? They were appearing to put the goals of the team as the most important thing, but there was really something else driving what they were trying to do, and it was, I'll look more important and can get raises and stuff if I have a bigger team underneath me. Okay, let's see. So 58% said they delivered late. So that's actually not the worst outcome, right? If you were able to deliver and deliver late, that may not have been that bad. Still to be determined. Project was canceled. Delivered on schedule, we got 4%. That's great. Delivered ahead of schedule. No one has actually had that happen. The idea of delivering late, one thing that's interesting is when you add 3 times more people to the project, in some cases, not only do you deliver late, but you deliver later than you were going to when you had the smaller team. And that's not unheard of and not even unusual. Okay, so large teams obscure small manageable failures. Large teams obscure small manageable failures. If you're doing something with 5 people, it's a lot easier to tell if they're making progress or not. If you are unable to deliver something on a regular basis, iteratively, and show progress and show that you're being efficient with 5 people, scaling that up to 50 people is going to make it a lot harder to see the failure that's there. And this is one of the reasons that it's really easy to try to scale teams up before it's helpful to them or when it's not helpful to them, because it makes the thing that's showing failure go away because you now obscure it and you can't see it because you've got so much going on. And so it gives you reasons that this is going to, oh, well, it'll take us a while to get up to speed because we've got this many, we've got 50 people now, so now we need a year to get up to speed on stuff. But large teams obscure small manageable failures. So should we always try to avoid large teams? And I would say no, but we should try to avoid large failures. There are times where a large team might be valuable, but if you use a large team, if you go to a large team when you're still at the point that it will obscure the small failures, then you're setting yourself up for likely having a big failure later on. You're not going to be able to see the small stuff and adjust as you go. If someone is pushing you toward higher risk, be suspicious. And pushing toward large team before you've developed the ability to deliver as a small team is pushing you toward higher risk. Embrace small failures in order to avoid large failures. So the fact you've got a small team that may not be hitting the mark of what they need to do efficiently, embrace that and figure out how to change it when it's small and you actually can change it instead of trying to scale up the thing that is not working. It's very hard with large teams to embrace small failures in order to avoid a large failure just because it's so much harder to see what's going on. So conversation with Bob. Bob says, we are building a TV factory. Great. Do you know how to make TVs? No. Should you figure that out before you build a TV factory? He's like, but we can't scale without a factory. Well, what Bob is saying is true, kind of. But if you can't build a TV, you're not going to be very successful at building a TV factory. Bob does not have a scaling problem here, right? So building a TV factory for knowing how to build a single TV what will be the results? Will it make it easier to figure out how to build a TV? Will it make it harder to figure out how to build a TV? Or will it result in a factory that's incapable of producing TVs? And there's no necessarily right answer. This is just your opinion. What do you think it most does? Probably multiple answers. I don't know if I set this up for multiple answers or not. Okay, so making it easier to figure out how to build a TV. 2% are saying that. And I can see how you could reason that thinking about your factory is important when you go to build a TV because you want to find a way to make it. But if you don't even know if you are capable of making TVs yet, Building the factory first probably is not a good way to ensure success. In fact, if you haven't even built a single TV, the chances of building a factory that is capable of producing TVs is probably pretty slow, unless you somehow figure out how to build TVs as part of the process. It's very likely you'll end up building a lot of stuff to produce TVs based on an incorrect knowledge of how TVs are built, and then find out, oh, that's not what we need. Now we either need to retrofit the factory. Once we've experimented at a large scale of building thousands of units and discovering they didn't work, rather than a smaller scale. So it's probably going to make it harder to figure out how to build a TV. It's also probably going to result in a factory that's incapable of producing TVs. So in thinking about Bob here, Bob does not have a scaling problem. Bob has a we don't know how to build TVs problem. He shouldn't try to fix the scaling problem until he's actually dealt with the immediate problem, which is they don't know how to build televisions. So what team size is more risky for learning to iteratively deliver software? In your experience or opinion, which is more risky for learning to iteratively deliver software? So in my experience, the 500 people would be the most risky for learning to iteratively deliver software, just because if you do anything wrong, it's now by 100 times more expensive than what you could have learned with 5 people. So you've got some people saying that 5 people is more risky, probably because if you work on something that for some reason you just cannot deliver with 5 people, I'm curious what situation that would be, but maybe there is a situation where that would be the case. I have not encountered those, but maybe there is. We've got 11% saying 50 people is more risky than the 500 or 5 people, which is interesting. I'm not sure why, but most of us here, got 88% saying that 500 people is the most risky team size for learning to iteratively deliver software. I would agree with that. That's been my experience, because sometimes trying to learn how to iteratively deliver software is hard, right? It's difficult. You're going to make mistakes. If you assume you can deliver software without making any missteps, you're probably going to be disappointed. If I'm going to make missteps and try to figure out how to do things, it's a lot cheaper to do that with 5 people than it's going to be with 500 people. The infinite monkey theorem. So the idea, if you've got 500 people, you'll just be able to produce software by brute force random chance, I think it's for saying. Okay, so mitigating a push toward premature scaling. So this is one of the things that you might have a nefarious agent on your team pushing for. How can you mitigate this? Well, one way is don't try to fix a delivery problem by scaling your problem, right? If you have a delivery problem, scaling up the thing that's not working is not a solution. You need to actually fix the problem first, which is you have a delivery problem. You're not able to deliver software efficiently with 5 people. Scaling it up is not going to make it more efficient. Cross-functional teams is another way to mitigate a push toward premature scaling, and making sure that you've got a team with 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever small number that is, of people that can actually deliver something all the way through into the customer's hands. And only scale something that's working well on a small scale. If you get to a point that you've got a team, a small team of people that are delivering all the way through and valuable software all the way through, and it's efficient, now you may have something, you may have enough experience to say, okay, what if we want to duplicate this? What if we want to bring more people on and try to do this same thing? Now, it probably will be less efficient the more people you add, but that may be okay. You may be able to take a little bit of hit to efficiency just because you can have more stuff happening at one time. The total cost in man hours of delivering something with 50 people may, or often is, going to be more than if with 5 people just working their way through it. But that might be a reasonable exchange, though, if it costs us a little bit more, but we're able to deliver 5 years sooner than we could with just a small team delivering. However, it's very easy to underestimate what an efficient team of 5 people can do and overestimate what an inefficient team of 50 people are going to be able to do. Okay, so back to Pujol. Garbo, I'm going to call him Garbo. Okay, my Liverpool agent couldn't report on the fleet movement because he got sick and died. Okay, Nazis are saying, I'm very sorry to hear that. Then Pujol comes back and says, what do you think he did next? Did he ask to retire, ask for a replacement agent, demanded a meeting with Hitler, or ask for a pension for the widow? Nail it before you scale it. Yes, that's great, Scott. That's a good way of thinking about it. Because if you don't, you will scale something that is probably more expensive than you realize. Okay, what Garbo actually did here in this case is he asked for a pension for the widow. He said, I told his wife that the Reich would take care of her and pay her a pension. It's like, Germany needs to pay her a pension? Yes, I know the Fuhrer would want her taken care of. Well, okay, we'll pay her a pension then. So Garbo actually invented an agent, invented his death to cover, I think that's why he couldn't let people know about the fleet movement, and then further covered up by getting the Nazis to send money every month to the fake wife of the fake agent that had the fake death. So Garbo got the Nazis to pay for things that had nothing to do with their success. In this case, something that didn't even exist, but it had nothing to do with the Nazi success of being able to carry out their nefarious plot. What have you seen a double agent convince a customer to invest money in? So on an Agile team, have you ever seen a double agent, somebody that's maybe not completely bought into the Agile principles, that's convinced a customer to invest money in something that wasn't really aligned with their goal? Tableau, okay? And Tableau can be a good tool, right? There's places where it works really well. Kyle's evidently saying he's been in a situation where he's seen it where it wasn't necessarily in the customer's best interest. What else have you seen? Yeah, Mike was saying he doubled down on the misinformation, which is pretty brilliant. He misunderstood what Hitler meant when he said take care of her. Yes, that's possible. Okay. Investigate into microservice, product modernization, software as a service, building functionality that wasn't needed till later, change technology to a similar one that required a whole migration process, new monitoration tool, probably a new way to monitor stuff, reports, more and more reports. Yes, I've been on those teams too, right? As a matter of fact, one team I was on was concerned that the number of reports they were getting asked for was not going to be efficient to deliver because no one was going to use them. And somebody actually suggested, let's just say that all the reports are done, and whenever somebody files a request, a defect, then we'll create the report just in time, and that way we won't create any reports that no one actually needs. We didn't end up doing that because it felt very deceptive, but that was proposed. Pet projects that we had skills for, but not what was in the customer's best interest, additional processes and procedures. So these are all things that we've experienced, and probably a lot of you are looking at that and saying, yes, we've experienced those things. Buying Jira add-ins, which can be great things, right? Lots of meetings, that's a good one, right? That's something that double agents can easily convince the customer to invest money in. Not that all meetings are bad, but if it's a taking away from the ability to deliver working software into the customer's hand to delight the customer, it probably isn't the best thing. It could be moving them away from the goal. Okay, so here's some things I've seen. Building a proof of concept in different domain, researching blockchain technology, building a pattern for others to follow. So the idea of I'm going to build this pattern in a completely different domain, and then I'll show everybody else and they'll follow this pattern for it, even though I'm not actually working on delivering anything for the customer right now. As opposed to saying, I'm going to help build this particular thing the customer is working for, and through it we'll evolve a pattern that we can use for other things. Creating a framework that maybe doesn't need to be created, recreating a framework that already exists. There's been cases where I've seen people recreate SQL frameworks that exist, but they have a way they want to do it, and they try to do it. And now, not only do they have to maintain the software, but future generations are going to have to maintain this framework until sometimes they get a point to swap it out with something that's more standards-based. Creating a huge amount of software to support in order to avoid the risk of a nearly impossible scenario. So I've seen situations where teams have invested so much time. It's like, we think there's a risk that this particular technology will go away someday. So we're going to build lots and lots of stuff to insulate us from the risk that this technology will go away someday, which is a legitimate risk. It just has a very, very small chance of actually happening. Or building out a pet project. There's a cartoon from XKCD that I like, I wanted to throw in here, but So how to ensure that your code is never going to be reused, the one over on the left there. So it took some extra work to build, but now we'll be able to reuse it for all future projects. So if you've got that thinking, what the author is saying is that that will make sure that your code is never reused. On the other hand, how to ensure your code lives on forever, let's not overthink it. If this code is still being used that far in the future, we'll have bigger problems. You've probably experienced both of those things before. And I think one of the key things here is to make sure that we're focusing on how we evolve the software rather than being so focused on what we're doing today, how the software is going to evolve, because that gives us the balance of thinking toward the future without overbuilding things that we don't need today. So focus on evolving working code. These are ways to mitigate spending on things you don't need. Let users demo at the sprint demo. So this is a key thing. If you are actually letting the users be the ones driving at the sprint demo, they are only going to be able to demonstrate stuff that has meaning to them as the users, which means anything work that was done that didn't have to do with something that was directly impacting the users isn't going to get credit at the sprint demo. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be any work that falls into that category, but it does make sure that you're not in a situation where you're really rewarding and focusing work that's not actually delivering something for the customer. The rule of three, another way to mitigate spending on things you don't need. The rule of three is first time you do something, maybe it's not worth making it reusable because you still don't know anything about it, right? So you just build it the simplest way possible. Second time you do it, you might notice that you've done it before, maybe be informed by that, but still build it in the simplest way possible. By the third time you come around, if you need to build something the same, that might be a good time to abstract it out and make it reusable, make it a library or something like that. If we start at the very beginning and make it a library, we'll probably be wrong about what the future needs, and we may be wrong about whether the future is going to need other copies of this. So rule of three is another good one. Customer embedded in the development team. Customers embedded in the development team right there as the development is happening can answer questions, whether on a video conference or in the room. It's a lot easier to push out things that you don't need because the developers aren't having to make guesses about what the customer would say in a situation. There's a customer right there. Expect to change things as you go. Flexibility comes from being able to change your code. Being able to change your code comes from having tests. Last point, you rarely achieve flexibility by guessing correctly about you rarely achieve flexibility by guessing correctly about what will need to be changed in the future. So if we recognize we're probably going to guess wrong, if we do guess, it pushes us toward trying to make things flexible in ways that are going to actually let us change it rather than saying we built this so we don't have to change it. Okay, deliver working code that delights your customer. So this is one of the key things to steer us away from that type of misinformation, misleading. Okay, back to Garbo. So Garbo tells the Nazis, I sent a 200-word report yesterday. Did you read it? We're still working on it. Garbo says, okay, well, here's another one for today, and I'll get you another one tomorrow. Okay, thanks. Garbo was sending so much information that the goal was just to flood the Nazis with so much information that they couldn't even process it all. So before the Germans switched to radios in August of 1943, Garbo had sent over 300 reports of 200 words each. And keep in mind, these are supposedly coming from 27 different agents, but he's just making stuff up at first. And then when the UK gets involved, they're actually being careful of what they send to convey certain messages. But that is a huge amount of information, particularly coming from one person. If this guy had started writing novels, I would be amazed at how much he would be able to produce. Germany was so swamped with Garbo's reports that they didn't ever try to send any more spies. There wasn't any reason to send anybody else because there was so much information coming. They're like, we couldn't handle any more spies anyway. Nazis assumed that the quality of the information was somehow indicated by the quantity, but those are not the same thing. Whoops, wrong way. Oh, no, I did it. Okay. Nazis assumed that the quality of the information was somehow indicated by the quantity. If we go back and remind ourselves that working software is the primary measure of progress, what might represent quantity instead of quality in a sprint demos? So how might you, if we think about the sprint demos, what are things that could happen in a sprint demo that might make you feel like you're getting lots of stuff toward your goal, but really you're being misled by the quantity of things that are being presented rather than the quality of what's actually been done. So we've got discussion of documentation that was produced. Okay, we could produce lots of documentation without actually delivering something for the customer, right? So that could be an example of where our quantity of stuff is making us think we're making progress without really looking at the quality or the value of what's being produced. Which doesn't mean there's no place for documentation, but in the sprint demo, if that's what our focus is on, it could be an indication that we're being misled by a double agent or maybe even misleading ourselves. A discussion of research work that the team did. A demo of proof of concept technology the team wants to use, or a customer demoing their use of a new feature. This is the only one that I would say probably would not represent quantity over quality, because this is actually working code that we're demonstrating. These other things are probably things that actually you may have experienced at some point. Okay, so Bob, talking to Bob, somebody says, working software is the primary measure of progress. He says, but what if we want to measure documentation? No. Can we just measure architectural design as progress? Still no. Proof of concept bookstore design. Does the customer want a bookstore? No. Then don't count it as progress. So, ways to mitigate fixation on quantity. Only demo working stories in a sprint demo. That's one thing you can do to help make sure that you're pushing your team toward focusing on the quality and the value of what's being produced rather than the quantity. If you have demos where people are coming in and demonstrating, hey, we built this proof of concept, or hey, we did all this research on this new technology. It's not that those things are bad, but that's a big shift in focus, because now you're focused on whether people were busy during the sprint instead of what was actually delivered that was valuable. A good point about the principle also applies to meetings. That's a very good point, Eli. Working units that have meaning for the actual users. It's easy to slice things up the way that a developer might think about them or how they are architecturally set up, but in ways that don't have meaning for the actual user, which means it's really easy to obscure the value of what's being delivered because we're focused on the quantity of all the pieces that are involved. Track stories, not task, because we want to be thinking about how we're delivering something that's usable to the user. Now, if there's value in keeping track of tasks in Jira or whatever you use, that's fine. But you don't want that to be the thing that you're focusing on. You delivered is a series of tasks. You want the stories, the thing that the user can actually use that is delivering working software. And then have daily sprints focused on how to deliver existing work before starting something new, right? It's not the quantity of things we can start, it's the value of the things that we were able to finish. Okay, so Pujo Garbo sends a letter to the Nazis. He says, this was actually earlier on in the war, he said, warships are leaving port with camouflage suitable for Africa. Sincerely, Alaric, which is his name, his code name that Nazis gave him. Okay, so that gets postmarked. Then it gets held by the British until it's not useful anymore, and then it's sent to the Nazis. And the Nazis actually responded, and they said, your report was magnificent. Unfortunately, we got it too late, but that was just magnificent information. And what was happening here is Garbo was giving them information too late, right? Too late to be useful, which is exactly what he was supposed to be doing. But getting information too late can be worse than useless, right? Getting good information too late can be worse than useless. And which was brilliant, and it's a good thing he was doing that, because that was a very key thing in changing the core, or in letting the Allies win the war. But on your Agile team, you want to make sure you're not getting information too late in ways that are worse than not having the information at all. The customer doesn't feel they're getting a good return on investment. Okay, that's good information, right? That's helpful. Can we try to better align our efforts with their needs? No need, they canceled the project. Okay, this is information. This is really, really good information, but it's so late that it's worse than useless, right? It didn't help change anything. Okay. So thinking in terms of this, is your team getting information in the time they need to actually do something with it? If not, it may be worse than useless. Okay, so toward the end of the war, there was a conversation with something like this. So Pujo says, I have an agent coming with important information, so be sure to be on tomorrow at 3 a.m. He sent that information. This was very carefully calculated around the time before storming Normandy of how they were going to give information that was true, but in ways that were useless, that were in ways that would mislead the Nazis. For some inexplicable reason, no one knows, the Nazis actually did not show up at 3 a.m. So they say they're going to show up next day, 3 a.m. Hello, anyone there? No one's there. 8 o'clock in the morning, the Nazis show up and say, hey, sorry, I didn't make it on time. Garbo replied with this, which I thought was brilliant. He said, I cannot accept excuses or negligence. Were it not for my ideals, I would abandon the work. So he's chastising the Nazis for not showing up to receive the misinformation that he was trying to send to them. It actually worked out great for the Allies because they were able to include lots more information since it was delayed, and in the Nazis' mind, it was like this was all the information we would have gotten if we had have showed up at 3 o'clock. But it wasn't. There was lots more information that they were able to do because it was no longer actionable for the Nazis. Have you ever had someone on your team threaten to quit? Oh, I spelled it wrong. Sorry, not quite. Quit. That should be quit. Quit the team if the team doesn't do something that violates the Agile principles. So have you ever been in a situation where somebody threatened to quit if the team doesn't do something that violates the Agile principles? So this is something, and I, the threaten to quit, there's subtle threats, and then there are like people that would actually quit. But this is something that happens sometimes, right? It can increase I've seen teams that have been pushed to do things that they knew voided or would go against the Agile principles because somebody was threatened to quit if the team didn't do this one thing, whether it was their pet project or whatever it was they were trying to do. So 74% of you glad for that, but this is something to watch out for on your Agile teams. Okay, so this conversation that Garbo was having with the Nazis, what was going on is there was Operation Overlord, which was going to be the Normandy invasion. There was also Operation Fortitude, which was a misinformation campaign designed to try to keep the Nazis from having sufficient forces to defend Normandy. So Operation Fortitude, they were trying to mislead the Nazis into defending Calais. I think I'm saying that right. Calais? I'll just look that up again. They created a fictional buildup of troops in southern England, and they were going to convince the Axis powers that Normandy was a diversion. So the actual thing they were doing, attacking Normandy, they were going to let them know that they were attacking Normandy, and then say, but it's a diversion. Watch out for they're going to be attacking up north at the Strait of Dover, I believe. So they built up all this built huge, this is an inflatable tank. And they put these inflatable tanks out where Germans could see them to assume they were building up in this other place, not in Normandy. And just out of curiosity, I went to see if I could buy an inflatable tank, and it turns out this was the closest I could find on Amazon. But if you're willing to spend $1,200 at Alibaba, you can get something that looks like this. So for anybody that wants an inflatable tank, you can get them today. Okay, so Peugeot says the Allies are going to attack Normandy, but only to distract you from the real invasion at Calais. So Normans are like, okay, to Calais or bust. So on a map here's Normandy down here. So he was able, and lots of things were going on, between all the misinformation, they were able to convince the Germans that, yes, they're being attacked in Normandy, but don't worry about that. You need to really defend up here because this is where, somewhere up here is where all the fake inflatable things were, and this is where you're going to be attacked. He was so convincing in all of that 2 months after the Normandy invasion, the Germans still had soldiers waiting for the invasion at Calais. So if you think about that, the way that Garbo was able to provide so much information got the Germans to the point that they were still trying to defend this 2 months after the Normandy invasion. That's just incredible how much they had been misled. So what type of information had Garbo given the Germans? I probably should have put this before the thing about Normandy because that was actually misinformation, but useful information, but too late to be actionable, useful actionable information, or incorrect information. And what I think is interesting about this when thinking about our Agile teams is there's probably lots of times we may not have things that are just blatantly incorrect. There may be grains of truth in them, but they may be too late to be actionable, or it may be stuff that that's going to, it may be things that have grains of truth, but in the wrong direction. But yes, this is what he was doing. He was giving useful information, but too late for it actually to be advantageous to them. So the Nazis had no reason to trust Garbo based on the value of what he had provided, only on the quantity of what he had provided. So if the Nazis went back through and said, okay, we've got these 27 agents here, what have they actually helped us do in the war? The answer would have been nothing, right? None of what they provided gave them any value of what they were doing. However, the quantity of what they had done made the Nazis think that it was very trustworthy and that they needed to pay attention to it. So trustworthy that they were still hanging out around Calais 2 months after the Normandy invasion. So what are you using to get your customer to build trust in your team? What are the things that are happening on your team that are helping build trust in your team? Is it the value of the working code you're providing, the quantity of the work that you are doing, or smoke and mirrors? So this should be what we're striving for, but it's easy to get in situations where we're actually, the thing that we're trying to promote to build trust is the quantity rather than the value of the code that we're providing. Also been on teams where it's smoke and mirrors, like the application doesn't really work, but we have a way to make it look like it's work. I've seen that happen before too. But this is what we want to avoid, but it's really easy to get into this trap. If your team is headed this direction, like I said, it's probably not a nefarious double agent on your team that's doing it, but this is a really, really dangerous thing because it's not the quantity of the work. You can make it seem really, really trustworthy to your customers if you're focusing on the quantity rather than the value you're providing until you get to the very end and then everything falls apart. If the Nazis had have considered the value of Garbo's report, the war might have gone much differently, and thankfully it didn't. There was always a good reason why Garbo didn't provide anything valuable, right? The agent died. He wasn't able to go. Matter of fact, at one point, Garbo even said that he was arrested. They were asking for information, and British intelligence said, if we give them that information, there's no way to give that information too late in ways that won't help them. So suddenly Garbo gets arrested, and then they end up, they say he got arrested, and then he ended up with this formal letter of apology from the British government that they had arrested him, and they shouldn't have because he's got diplomatic immunity or whatever it was. So they concocted this whole thing to have a really good reason why he wasn't able to provide the information. Remember, the agent that died, they actually ran an obituary in the newspaper, and that got shipped over to the Nazis as well. So always a very, very good reason, but never providing anything that was actually valuable. If there's always a good reason why your team wasn't able to deliver something valuable, that should be a red flag. That should be a problem. Like I said, it's probably not because anybody's doing something nefarious, but that's how you should actually be measuring stuff. You need to be paying attention and really measuring against whether something valuable was being delivered, not just have we done a lot of work. There's always a little smoke somewhere. So, what is the most frequently heard reason that a team couldn't deliver value in a sprint? It's the most frequently heard reason that you've heard that a team couldn't deliver value in a sprint. So just think about that and say, is it stories were bigger than expected? That's something I've heard. Waiting for others to finish. Working on runway, lots of tasks to do first. Building a pipeline. Using new technology. So these are all things that I have heard. And there's not a right answer here. But if you're hearing these types of things, you need to really go back and do some soul searching and making sure that you're not being misled, even with best intentions, toward doing things that aren't actually delivering on a regular basis value. Because you can deliver lots of stuff in terms of quantity and runway work and all kinds of things without ever getting to the value, and only to find out at the end that you're in a very different place than where you need to be. The key to spotting an agile double agent: they will shift the focus to the quantity of work that's being done rather than the value of what is actually being delivered to the customer. So the key to spotting an agile double agent: they will shift the focus to the quantity of work being done rather than the value of what is actually being delivered to the customer each sprint. So that gets us through the talk. I hope that was useful. I'd love to hear what you think. I do have a competitive quiz at the end. I'm going to give away one of my t-shirts here. So one of these. We value face-to-face communication. Turn your video on. I think I've got most sizes, but whoever wins will find a way to work it out. So I know we're running a little bit late, but just a reminder, next week we're doing behavior-driven development with robots. We're going to be working through using BDD in a setting that even if you aren't familiar with code, should be interesting. So I encourage you to come take that invite, forward it to anyone that wants to kind of see what the BDD process looks like, because this will be a really good opportunity for them. Okay, so let's look at the, oh, wait, is that before? Okay, I will skip over that one. Okay, so create an environment where it's very difficult to confuse being busy with actually delivering value to the customer. We want to make sure that those things are not seen as the same thing. Okay, join the quiz. If anybody wants to compete for the shirt and have a few minutes to stick around. Oh, was there a question in a Q&A? Let me look. I think I've got Q&A here while you join. Okay, what do you mean by sprint demo? So a lot of times if you're following Scrum and every iteration you're demoing to the customer or to the stakeholders, here's what we delivered in the last 2 weeks. So that's what I mean by sprint demo. So sorry I didn't catch that earlier. That's what I mean by sprint demo. And even if you're using Kanban or something like that, there usually is some type of place where you say, you demo and say, here's what we did. Does this meet expectations? Is everybody happy with this? Good question. And thanks, Astrid, for pointing that out. Okay, give you just a few more seconds to join. 37 people. Give you about 3 or 4 more seconds. Matter of fact, let me add this right here just in case anyone isn't getting to it in the app. Oh, okay, there we go. I accidentally clicked things, so you got 12 seconds. An Agile double agent will try to deliver value to the customer, get the team focused on the quantity of their work, measure progress as working software, or request pensions for fictitious widows. What will an Agile agent try to do? So yes, they'll get the team focused on the quantity of the work. An Agile double agent probably will not try to deliver value to the customer because they want to focus on the quantity of work because, like our example with Pujo, he was able to completely distract the Nazis by focusing on the quantity of work without ever delivering something that was valuable. They're probably less likely to measure progress as working software because that focuses on the value to the customer. And probably not, I haven't seen it much on Agile teams where they're requesting pensions for fictitious widows. Pujo did that. He wasn't working on a software development team, but yes. Okay, next question. How do you preserve flexibility? How do you preserve flexibility? Is it by planning ahead for what will need to be changed, by making software easy to test, by investing in your runway, or by building proofs of concepts? We mentioned this earlier, and let's see. So planning ahead for what will need to be changed. While that sounds very valuable, the problem is you're probably going to guess wrong. Like I mentioned, you're probably going to guess wrong about most or all of it. And so really what we want to do to preserve flexibility is making sure that our software is easy to test so we can make changes and prove that nothing is broken. If we do this, we're able to make changes on the small scale whenever we discover them, instead of getting to the end and then having to make really, really big changes and then everything breaks and then we've got to find ways to make it work. So we can preserve flexibility by making software easy to test. Investing in your runway can be valuable sometimes as long as it's not taking away from delivering software, and oftentimes that's what ends up happening. Building proof of concepts, sometimes there's value in those, but oftentimes you're better off working in your domain rather than a proof of concept from somewhere else, because you can build a proof of concept that proves exactly how to build a bookstore, but you may not be building a bookstore. What is one way to foil Agile double agents? Only demo working software at the sprint demo, use a lie detector, add tasks for their work to the board, or have them run the stand-up. And this is based on what I suggested in the talk. Only demo working software at the sprint demo. If we're only demoing working software in the sprint demo, it's a lot harder to hide. It's a lot harder to do work that's not delivering something for the customer and have it feel like value. Now, that may mean that some sprint, one developer doesn't have anything to demo because they've been working on something that isn't something that gets demoed in the sprint demo. That's not necessarily bad, But if you have a developer that never is demoing anything at, then either they're supporting other people or maybe they're working on stuff that isn't really aligned with how you're measuring progress. What should you wait for to scale? What should you wait for before you scale? Wait for the budget to be available. Don't wait, scale early and often. When you have something working efficiently, or when the project is identified as being behind schedule. What should you wait for to scale? And yes, when you have something working efficiently, because if you don't have anything efficiently yet, you don't have a scaling problem. You don't know how to actually do the thing you're trying to do well yet. Okay, last question. Are you going to forward next week's Agile Lunch and Learn to others? I messed up a lot of words here. Any answer here is correct, but I want to get you thinking, and I'm hoping most of us do one of these two and continue to forward it. So let's see. We have, yes, okay, we've got 63% of us are going to forward it, 37% already have, and 10% of you are like, I'm not forwarding it to anyone. So all those answers I believe I had selected as being right. Let's see where we ended up with our winner here. Oops. How do I show my winner? Uh-oh, did I mess this up somehow? Okay, that's almost there. Okay, there we go. Okay, Eliza Miller, you win the shirt. So send me an email. You can take a screenshot of that if you want. Send me your shirt size, and I'll try to get one of these in the mail to you. If I'm out of your size, I'll let you know what else I've got, but I think I've got most sizes here.
Thank you.
So congratulations. And Eli, JP, Claire, and Astrid, very good. You guys were very, very close in the running here. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I would love to get feedback of what you thought of this. So if you want to drop me an email, let me know. This was a very kind of different type of talk. I hope it was useful and made us think about Agile in maybe ways we don't usually. But thanks for participating, and hope to see you next week. We're going to be talking about behavior-driven development. It's going to be a lot of fun. I will stick around for a few minutes in case people have any questions. Check the chat here. Any questions, concerns, aggravations? I'd love to talk about them.